Frank Morrison's black sedan rolled to a stop at the edge of the circular driveway, gravel crunching softly beneath the tires. He sat for a moment with the engine still running, hands gripping the steering wheel, allowing himself to absorb the sight of the mansion he had built from nothing. The estate stretched before him like a monument to everything he had accomplished. Glass and steel reflecting the afternoon sun, perfectly manicured hedges lining the walkway, a fountain in the center courtyard where water danced in crystalline arcs. This was the dream, the proof that a kid from the projects could reshape reality through sheer will and sleepless nights. But today, looking at it, Frank felt something hollow pressing against his chest. He had left Singapore 2 days early, abandoning an $800 million merger that his partners insisted required his presence. The emails had been flooding his phone for hours. Urgent, critical, time-sensitive. Frank had silenced them all. For 15 years he had chased deals across continents, signed contracts in boardrooms that overlooked entire cities, built an empire that employed thousands. But something his mother's doctor said during their last brief phone call had lodged itself in his mind like a splinter he couldn't remove. Your mother's heart is weakening, Mr. Morrison. The stress on her system is considerable. I'm not sure how much time we have if things don't change. Frank had been in a Tokyo hotel room when he received that message, surrounded by lawyers reviewing acquisition documents. He had meant to call back, meant to ask questions, meant to do something. Instead, he had approved another business trip, this one to Singapore. Ruth had assured him she would handle everything. Ruth always handled everything. He turned off the engine and reached for the bouquet of white lilies resting on the passenger seat. He had bought them at the airport flower shop, remembering how his mother used to stop and admire lilies whenever they passed a street vendor during his childhood. She never bought them for herself. Money was always too tight, always needed for something more practical. But she would pause, just for a moment, and breathe in their fragrance with a smile that made her whole face soften. Today Frank had bought the most expensive arrangement they had. The florist had wrapped them in silver paper with a white silk ribbon. They looked too elegant, too formal for the woman who used to braid hair in their cramped kitchen at 4 in the morning so he could have lunch money. But they were beautiful, and his mother deserved beautiful things. She had given him everything. It was time he remembered that. Frank stepped out of the car, adjusting his suit jacket. He had dressed carefully that morning in Singapore, choosing the charcoal gray suit his mother had once said made him look distinguished. The word had made him laugh at the time. Distinguished. Such a far cry from the skinny kid who wore second-hand shoes with cardboard stuffed inside to cover the holes. But Rachel Morrison had always seen something in him that the world took years to recognize. She had believed when belief seemed like foolishness. The mansion's front entrance stood massive and imposing, but Frank found himself walking around the side instead, drawn by instinct toward the kitchen entrance his mother preferred. She had never felt comfortable with the grand foyer, the sweeping staircase, the chandelier that cost more than their old apartment building. She gravitated toward the kitchen, toward the smells of cooking and the sound of running water, toward spaces that felt like work and purpose rather than display. Frank pushed open the side gate, the hinges making a soft metallic whisper. The afternoon sun slanted across the back property, casting long shadows from the oak trees Ruth had insisted on planting. The landscaping back here was less formal, more practical. Storage sheds for equipment, the area where the groundskeepers kept their tools, the section where trash bins waited for weekly pickup. And that's when Frank saw them. Time collapsed into a single frozen moment. The bouquet of lilies slipped from his fingers, falling in slow motion toward the ground. Silver paper crinkled. White petals scattered across the paving stones, landing in puddles of greasy water that had leaked from the industrial trash bins. The silk ribbon unfurled like something dying. His mother knelt on the concrete between 2 rust-stained metal barrels, their sides bulging with garbage bags and kitchen refuse. Rachel Morrison, the woman who had walked him to school every morning holding his hand, who had worked 3 jobs and still found energy to help with homework, who had pressed her last $20 into his palm 15 years ago with a blessing, now knelt in filth with her silver hair hanging loose and uncombed around her face. Her clothing was wrong. All wrong. The simple floral blouse she usually kept so clean was smeared with dark stains. Grease. Sauce. Things Frank's mind refused to identify. Her hands. Those hands that had braided 1,000 heads of hair, that had scrubbed floors in other people's houses, that had held him when he cried, now picked through scraps of food scattered on the ground. Rice mixed with dirt, vegetable peelings, chicken bones with bits of meat still clinging to them. And standing over her, arm raised, face twisted with something that looked like satisfaction, was Ruth. His wife held a wooden stick, the kind the groundskeepers used to check sprinkler lines. She had it raised above her shoulder, frozen in the moment before striking. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the expression on her face. This wasn't anger. This wasn't loss of control. This was something calculated. Something that had been happening long enough to become routine. Ruth's designer clothes, her perfect hair, her manicured nails, everything about her screamed wealth and sophistication. And beneath her, broken and trembling, knelt the woman who had taught Frank that dignity didn't come from money, that strength lived in sacrifice, that love meant giving everything you had even when you had nothing left to give. Frank's voice tore out of his throat before his mind could catch up. Ruth jerked violently, the stick in her hand freezing midair. Her perfectly composed face drained of color as if someone had opened a valve and let all the blood run out. She spun toward him, her high heels skidding on the damp concrete, eyes going wide with something between shock and calculation. The world went silent. No birds. No distant traffic. No wind through the oak trees. Only the sound of his mother's shallow, frightened breathing and the thunder of Frank's heartbeat pounding in his ears, so loud he thought his skull might crack. Rachel lifted her head slowly. Her eyes, those gentle brown eyes that had watched him grow from nothing into something the world called successful, met his. And in them Frank saw everything he had been too busy to notice. Pain, exhaustion, humiliation so deep it had carved itself into her bones. But underneath all of that, inexplicably, a flicker of joy. Her son had come home. The moment stretched and broke. Frank stepped forward, his expensive leather shoes crunching over scattered lily petals, through puddles of filthy water that soaked into the Italian leather without him noticing or caring. Each step felt like moving through concrete, his legs heavy with a rage so pure it made his vision sharpen until every detail became unbearably clear. Ruth found her voice first, manufactured brightness cracking through genuine fear. "Frank, you're home early." Her hand moved behind her back, trying to hide the stick like a child caught stealing candy. "I didn't expect you until tonight. Your assistant said Singapore would take all week." He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Words felt inadequate for what he was witnessing. Instead, he moved past Ruth as if she were invisible, dropped to his knees in the filth beside his mother, not caring that his suit pants were absorbing the smell of rot and garbage, not caring that his perfectly pressed shirt was getting stained with the same grease that marked his mother's clothing. Rachel's skin felt paper-thin beneath his hands when he touched her arm. He could feel every bone, every ridge of her spine through the fabric of her blouse. When had she gotten so small? When had his mother, who had seemed so strong and unbreakable throughout his childhood, become this fragile creature who trembled at his touch? "Mom." His voice cracked on the word. "Are you okay? Why are you out here? Why didn't you call me?" Rachel shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes, but not falling. Old habits died hard. She had spent a lifetime not wanting to burden him with her pain. "I didn't want to bother you, baby. You're so busy. Important meetings, important people." She tried to smile, tried to protect him even now. "Ruth said I needed to learn some manners about wasting food. I thought she was just playing. You know how young people are these days." Something tore open inside Frank's chest. Not from his wife's cruelty, though that was unforgivable, but from the knowledge that his mother had been suffering while he signed contracts and gave speeches and allowed himself to believe that success meant he had taken care of her. He had given her a room in his mansion, access to his wealth, a place at his table. But he hadn't given her what she actually needed. His presence, his attention, his protection. Frank slid his arms beneath his mother's back and knees, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. And perhaps she did. Perhaps months of whatever Ruth had been doing had reduced her to this weightless thing he held against his chest. He could feel her heart beating too fast, too irregular. The weak flutter of someone whose body was giving up from stress and cruelty and the steady erosion of hope. Behind them, Ruth's voice rose with panic barely controlled beneath a veneer of indignation. "Frank, listen to me. Your mother isn't as innocent as she looks. She criticizes me constantly. My clothes. My spending. She told me I wasn't worthy of a billionaire husband, that I'm just a gold digger who got lucky. I was only teaching her some respect. She needed to understand that this is my house too. Frank turned slowly, his mother cradled in his arms, and looked at the woman he had married. Really looked at her. The designer dress. The perfect makeup. The carefully styled hair. All of it a performance, a costume worn to hide the rot underneath. How had he missed this? How had he been so blind? Respect. He said the word slowly, tasting its bitterness. Is this how you teach respect? By forcing a sick woman with a heart condition to kneel behind trash bins and eat scraps like an animal? Ruth's face flushed, anger and fear warring for dominance. You always take her side. What about me? I'm your wife. I deserve respect too. She disrespected me first. She questioned my worth, my place in this family. I have a right to defend myself. No. Frank cut her off, voice dropping to a deadly calm that made Ruth take an involuntary step backward. You don't have that right. No one has the right to humiliate my mother. Ever. The afternoon breeze picked up, carrying the scent of Ruth's expensive perfume mixed with the stench from the garbage bins. Somewhere in the distance, Frank could hear the fountain in the courtyard, water dancing mindlessly while his world fell apart. The smell of roasting meat drifted from the kitchen where the staff was preparing Thanksgiving dinner. Turkey, cornbread, all the traditional foods that were supposed to represent gratitude and family. The contrast felt obscene. Ruth's voice changed, dropping the defensive anger for something closer to pleading. Frank, don't say things you'll regret. It's Thanksgiving. Let's go inside, have dinner, talk about this calmly. I'm sorry if I went too far. Your mother and I have been under a lot of stress. We can work this out. Work this out. Frank repeated her words, holding his mother closer. His mind was already somewhere else, calculating, processing, making decisions with the same cold precision he used in business negotiations. You think this is something we work out over turkey and wine? He shifted his mother's weight in his arms, feeling how little she had become. Since the day I married you, I believed you would love my mother like your own. That's what you promised. At our wedding, in front of everyone, you vowed to care for her. I trusted you. I thought I had built something good here. A home. A family. His voice hardened. I was wrong. I wasn't here for my mother when she needed me. That's my failure. That's something I'll carry for the rest of my life. But today, right now, I fixed that mistake. Ruth's eyes widened, genuine fear replacing calculation. What are you saying? From this moment, we are done. The words fell between them like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this moment. Ruth blinked rapidly, waiting for him to take it back, to soften, to negotiate the way he always did in business. But Frank's face remained carved from granite, immovable and certain. Frank, you can't be serious. Don't throw away our marriage over this. It's just a misunderstanding. I'll apologize. I'll treat her better. I swear. Just don't do this. Her voice rose, panic bleeding through. Think about what you're saying. Think about the press. The investors. Your image. Everything we've built together. You can't just walk away. Watch me. Frank turned his back on her and began walking toward the house, his mother's weight nothing in his arms, the sound of Ruth's protests fading behind him. With each step, clarity settled over him like armor. He had spent 15 years building an empire, acquiring companies, accumulating wealth, and in the process, he had forgotten the only lesson that mattered. The lesson his mother had tried to teach him when he left their apartment with $20 and a dream. Build something beautiful, baby. But don't ever forget where beautiful really lives. It lives in here. She had tapped his chest, over his heart. And Frank had forgotten. He had let the world convince him that beautiful lived in glass towers and magazine covers and bank accounts with too many zeros to count. He had let a woman who understood image but not integrity convince him that success meant abandoning the people who had loved him when he had nothing. Behind him, Ruth's sobs turned into screams, her careful composure finally shattering completely. She ran after them, designer heels clicking on the paving stones, reaching for his arm, his sleeve, anything to stop him. Frank, please. I love you. Don't leave me over this. I can't go back to my parents in shame. I can't. Everything I've worked for, everything I've done. Don't throw it all away. I'll change. I promise I'll change. Frank stopped at the threshold of the house and turned back one final time. Ruth stood there, mascara running in dark streaks down her face, her perfect exterior finally cracking to reveal the desperate, grasping thing underneath. For a moment, just a moment, he felt something that might have been pity. But then he looked down at his mother's face, at the bruise near her temple, at the way her hands still trembled, and the pity evaporated. I should have stopped this the first time you disrespected my mother. My mistake was giving you too many chances. That mistake ends today. He stepped into the house, leaving his wife standing alone in the backyard among the scattered lily petals and the garbage bins, her sobs echoing through the manicured gardens and expensive landscaping that suddenly meant nothing at all. Inside, the mansion felt foreign. The crystal chandeliers, the imported marble floors, the paintings that cost more than most people earned in a year. Frank looked around at the wealth he had accumulated and felt nothing but disgust. This house had become a prison. A beautiful, expensive prison where his mother had been tortured while he chased deals on the other side of the world. He carried Rachel up the grand staircase she had never felt comfortable using, past the family portraits that showed a version of their life that had never really existed, into the master bedroom that Ruth had decorated with cold, sterile perfection. He laid his mother gently on the bed, pulled the silk comforter over her trembling body, and sat beside her, holding her hand. Rest now, Mom. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Rachel's eyes fluttered closed, exhaustion overwhelming relief. Her breathing gradually slowed, evened out, the panicked flutter of her heartbeat settling into something more stable. Frank sat watching her, memorizing the lines of her face, the silver in her hair, all the details he had been too busy to notice. And in that moment, sitting in his expensive bedroom beside his sleeping mother, Frank Morrison made a decision that would change everything. The mansion, the lifestyle, the marriage, all of it was built on sand. He had spent 15 years constructing an empire and forgotten the only foundation that mattered. Tomorrow he would begin tearing it all down. Tonight, he would simply stay here, holding his mother's hand, guarding her sleep the way she had once guarded his. The merger could fail. The investors could panic. The press could write whatever they wanted. None of it mattered anymore. He had come home. Finally, truly, he had come home. Outside, the sun began to set over the mansion, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The Thanksgiving dinner sat untouched in the kitchen, growing cold while the staff whispered nervously about what they had seen. Ruth remained in the backyard, her sobs eventually quieting into shocked silence as reality settled over her like a shroud. And Frank Morrison sat vigil beside his mother, one hand holding hers, the other pulling his phone from his pocket. He had calls to make, lawyers to hire, security footage to review. But first, he sent a single text message to his assistant in Singapore, 3 words that would send shockwaves through his entire organization. I'm not coming back. Then he turned off his phone, set it on the nightstand, and returned his full attention to the only thing that had ever truly mattered. The woman who had given him everything, who had loved him when he was nothing, who had survived poverty and hardship and heartbreak to raise him into the man he was supposed to be. Not the billionaire, not the mogul, but the son who knew that protecting his mother was the only success that counted. The room grew dark as evening settled over the estate. Frank didn't turn on the lights. He simply sat in the gathering darkness, listening to his mother breathe, feeling her hand warm in his, knowing that tomorrow everything would change. The empire he had built would shake. His reputation would suffer. People would question his judgment, his priorities, his sanity. Let them question. Let them judge. Frank had finally remembered something more important than their opinions. He had remembered what his mother whispered to him all those years ago, tapping his chest over his heart. Beautiful lives here. Not in mansions or bank accounts or magazine covers. Here, in the love between a mother and her son, in the promise to protect the people who protected you, in the courage to tear down everything you built when you realized it was constructed on the wrong foundation. Rachel stirred in her sleep, her hand tightening briefly around his. Frank leaned forward, pressed a kiss to her forehead, and whispered the words he should have said every day for the past 15 years. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry. And I promise you, no one will ever hurt you again. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering the last of the lily petals across the darkening grounds. Inside, Frank Morrison sat watch over his mother's rest, beginning the long journey back to the man he was always meant to be. Not the billionaire who had forgotten where he came from, but the son who finally remembered what mattered most. The night deepened. The mansion settled into silence. And Frank remained, faithful in his vigil, counting not his wealth or achievements or the empire that would crumble tomorrow, but something far more precious. His mother's steady breaths, each one a gift, each one a reminder that some things are worth more than all the money in the world. He had built an empire from nothing. Now he would do something harder. He would build a home from the ruins of his mistakes. And this time, he would get it right. The security room in the basement felt like descending into another world. Frank hadn't been down here since the system was installed 3 years ago, back when Ruth convinced him they needed comprehensive surveillance for insurance purposes and staff management. The heavy steel door required a key card he had to dig out of his office drawer, covered in dust from disuse. When the lock finally clicked open and fluorescent lights flickered to life, Frank stepped into a space that felt more like a command center than part of his home. The room stretched longer than he expected, lined with server racks on one side and a curved desk on the other. Above the desk, mounted on the wall, 12 monitors displayed live feeds from every corner of the estate. Front gate, driveway, living room, kitchen, hallways, guest rooms, the pool area, the gardens. And there, in the bottom right corner, the backyard where just hours ago he had discovered his wife's true nature. Marcus, the young security technician, sat in an ergonomic chair that looked too expensive for a basement position. He jumped when Frank entered, nearly spilling coffee across the keyboard. His eyes went wide with recognition, mixed with obvious discomfort. Everyone on staff had heard about the confrontation by now. Servants talked. News traveled fast through the mansion's corridors. "Mr. Morrison, sir." Marcus stood quickly, smoothing his uniform shirt. "I wasn't expecting you down here. Is everything all right? Do you need me to review something specific?" Frank loosened his tie, the silk suddenly feeling like a noose around his throat. He unbuttoned his collar, stripped off his suit jacket, and draped it over a chair with none of his usual care for expensive fabric. His white shirt was still stained from kneeling in garbage water. He hadn't changed, hadn't eaten, hadn't done anything except sit with his mother until she fell into exhausted sleep, then arrange for a private nurse to stay with her through the night. "I need to see everything." Frank's voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw from hours of silent fury. 14 days. Starting from when I left for Tokyo 2 weeks ago. Every camera. Every hour. I want to see what happened when I wasn't here. Marcus's face went pale. He glanced at the monitors, then back at Frank, clearly wrestling with something. "Sir, are you sure? Some of this footage, it's not pleasant. Maybe you should wait until morning, get some rest, come back when you're in a better frame of mind. Show me. Now." The command left no room for negotiation. Marcus sank back into his chair, fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The main monitor blinked, time codes appearing in the corner. The date rolled backward, hours rewinding in fast motion until they reached 2 weeks prior. The morning Frank had left for the airport, his mother waving from the doorway while Ruth stood beside her wearing a perfect smile. "Stop." Frank moved closer, studying the frozen image. His mother looked different already, thinner than he remembered. The smile on her face didn't quite reach her eyes. How had he missed that? How had he walked out that door without seeing the fear hiding beneath her brave expression? "This is day 1, Marcus said quietly. "After you left for Tokyo. Do you want me to play it at normal speed or fast forward through the quiet sections?" "Normal speed. All of it." Frank pulled over a second chair and sat down, settling in for what he knew would be the longest night of his life. "I need to see everything." Marcus pressed play. For the first few hours, nothing seemed unusual. The household staff moved through their routines. Ruth left for the foundation office around 9, returned for lunch around 1. Rachel spent most of the morning in her small room near the service entrance, emerging only occasionally to walk slowly through the gardens, leaning heavily on her cane. Then, around 3 in the afternoon on that first day, something shifted. The kitchen camera showed Rachel preparing a meal with careful attention. She moved slowly, her arthritis clearly bothering her, but she persisted. She arranged food on a tray, making it presentable. Some kind of sandwich, sliced fruit, a glass of water. She carried it outside to the patio where Ruth sat absorbed in her phone, scrolling through social media with the glazed expression of someone who had lost hours to the endless scroll. Frank leaned forward, hands gripping the armrests of his chair. The camera had no audio, but he could read body language clearly enough. Rachel approached with the tray, smiling gently, her lips moving in what must have been a polite greeting. She placed the tray on the table beside Ruth, pushing it forward with both hands. Ruth didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the gesture, just kept scrolling, her thumb moving in repetitive swipes across the screen. Rachel stood there for a moment, still smiling, clearly trying to start some kind of conversation. Her mouth moved again, another attempt at connection. Then Ruth said something. One sentence, sharp and quick. Even without audio, Frank could see the change in his mother's expression. The smile faltered but held. Rachel laughed softly, nervously, trying to smooth over whatever cutting remark his wife had made. What happened next made Frank's stomach turn. Ruth stood abruptly, her chair scraping backward. She grabbed the plate from the tray and without hesitation, without anger even, just cold, deliberate motion, dumped the entire thing onto the patio stones. The sandwich broke apart. Fruit rolled across the flagstones. The water glass shattered, sending shards of crystal across the expensive outdoor furniture. Rachel's hands flew to her mouth, shock written across every line of her body. She immediately dropped to her knees, apologizing. That much was clear from her frantic gestures. She started picking up the food piece by piece, gathering broken glass in her bare hands, moving with the panicked energy of someone who believed this was somehow her fault. And Ruth just stood there, arms folded across her chest, face impassive, watching like a prison warden observing an inmate clean up her cell. No guilt, no shame, just cold observation of punishment being carried out. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside Frank, but said nothing. They watched as Rachel gathered every scrap, every shard, apologizing the entire time to a woman who never once moved to help or show remorse. When Rachel finally stood, her hands bleeding from the broken glass, Ruth turned and walked back into the house without a backward glance. Frank's fingernails dug into the leather armrests. That was day one, the first day he left. The first time Ruth felt free to show who she really was when no one was watching. Except someone was watching. The cameras captured everything. Next, Frank's voice came out barely above a whisper. Show me day 3. Marcus pulled up the living room camera, dated 3 days after Frank's departure. The timestamp read 11 in the morning. Ruth descended the grand staircase holding a pair of red stilettos, designer shoes that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Rachel was in the living room dusting the television cabinet, her curved back visible through her thin blouse. The years of hard labor had permanently bent her spine, giving her the posture of someone who had carried too many burdens for too long. Rachel turned when Ruth entered, her face lighting up with another gentle smile. She said something, probably a morning greeting. Then she noticed the shoes. Her eyes went to them with what looked like innocent admiration. She reached out, not grabbing, just extending her hand to touch the leather, the way someone might admire a work of art in a museum. Ruth jerked the shoes away violently. Then, with deliberate cruelty, she threw them at Rachel's legs. The impact wasn't hard enough to cause serious injury, but the humiliation was the point. Rachel stumbled, nearly fell, caught herself on the cabinet. Her hand went to her chest, the gesture Frank recognized from childhood. His mother's heart. Always her weak point, the organ that had struggled since a bout of rheumatic fever when she was young. Ruth pointed at Rachel's forehead, her face twisted in anger over something so trivial it defied comprehension. She scolded, her mouth moving in what was clearly a stream of insults. Then Ruth gestured downward in a slow, deliberate motion. No. Frank breathed the word, but he already knew what was coming. Rachel lowered herself to her knees. Slowly, painfully, her joints clearly protesting. She began wiping the floor where the shoes had fallen, cleaning away invisible dirt, erasing invisible stains. And Ruth pulled out her phone, aimed it at Rachel, filmed the elderly woman kneeling and cleaning, clearly capturing footage for some purpose Frank couldn't begin to understand. Blackmail? Entertainment? Simple cruelty? The worst part was Ruth's face. From the security camera angle, Frank could see her expression clearly. She was smiling, not grimacing in anger, not scowling in frustration, smiling with genuine pleasure at the sight of an elderly woman with a heart condition on her knees cleaning imaginary dirt. Marcus cleared his throat. Sir, maybe we should take a break. This is a lot to process all at once. Keep going. Frank's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Day 7. Show me day 7. The footage jumped forward. Hallway camera. Early morning, rain visible through the windows lining the corridor. Rachel walked slowly carrying a laundry basket, her movements careful and measured. The basket looked too heavy for her, but she carried it anyway, probably trying to help the household staff, unable to simply sit idle even in a mansion where servants handled everything. Ruth appeared behind her seemingly from nowhere. In her hand was a large glass of water, the crystal tumbler catching light from the hallway sconces. She called out, her mouth forming words Rachel couldn't hear. Rachel turned, set down the basket, placed a hand on her chest again. That gesture. Always that gesture when her heart troubled her. Ruth said something long and sharp, her face animated with the kind of self-righteous anger people summon when they want to justify cruelty. Rachel shook her head timidly, clearly trying to de-escalate, trying to apologize for whatever imagined offense had triggered this confrontation. Ruth shrugged, actually shrugged, like what she was about to do meant nothing. Then she stepped forward and poured the entire glass of ice water over Rachel's head. The silver hair that Rachel kept so carefully combed plastered itself to her skull. Her blouse, already worn thin from years of washing, became transparent as it soaked through. Water ran down her face, dripping onto the expensive carpet. Rachel gasped, clutched her chest harder, coughed violently. The shock of cold water, the stress, her weak heart, all of it combining into a medical crisis waiting to happen. Ruth stepped back, and she laughed. Even without audio, Frank could see her shoulders shaking, her head tilting back, her mouth open wide with amusement at the sight of a sick old woman gasping for breath in a soaked shirt. Then Ruth simply walked away, leaving Rachel standing alone in the hallway, dripping and shaking and coughing, one hand pressed over her struggling heart. Frank stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward and slamming into the server rack. He paced the small room, hands clenched into fists, breathing hard through his nose. Every muscle in his body screamed for violence, for action, for some way to reach through time and stop what he was seeing. But these were ghosts. Events already passed. Damage already done. How much more? His voice shook. How many more clips like this? Marcus consulted his notes, his face grave. 37 incidents over 14 days, sir. They escalate. Some are verbal only, so we can't see the full extent. But the physical ones, there are at least 15 that I flagged as concerning when I reviewed the footage yesterday. Yesterday? Frank turned sharply. You saw this yesterday? The young man had the decency to look ashamed. I did. I was about to report it to you tonight when you returned from Singapore. I swear, Mr. Morrison. I didn't know what to do. Mrs. Morrison controls the staff. She fires people. Last month, she terminated Elena for trying to help your mother. Claimed Elena stole jewelry. Elena didn't steal anything. She just brought your mother soup when she was sick. Frank closed his eyes, nausea rising in his throat. The corruption went deeper than he thought. Ruth had created an atmosphere of fear, ensuring no one would dare protect Rachel or report the abuse. She had isolated his mother completely, surrounding her with people too terrified for their jobs to intervene. Show me yesterday morning. The kitchen. I want to see what happened right before I came home. Marcus pulled up the footage. Kitchen camera. Yesterday morning. 6 hours before Frank walked through the gate and discovered the nightmare. Ruth stood at the sink scraping leftover food into the trash bin. Good food. Turkey. Vegetables. Bread. Perfectly edible meals being discarded. Rachel entered through the kitchen door, leaning on her cane, her thin frame barely supporting her own weight. She spoke, her face earnest, probably asking Ruth not to waste food. Rachel had grown up poor. Food waste would offend every fiber of her being. Ruth spun around, face contorted with sudden rage. She ranted, her mouth moving rapidly, gesturing wildly with the spatula in her hand. Rachel stepped back, raising one hand in a calming gesture, still trying to keep peace, still trying to smooth things over. Then Ruth did something that made Frank's blood turn to ice. She opened the trash bin wide, made a show of dumping all the leftovers inside, then turned to look directly at the camera, directly at the lens. Her smile stretched wide and cold, a predator marking territory. She knew the cameras were there. She knew someone might eventually see this. And she didn't care. The smile said everything. I'm untouchable. I'm the wife of a billionaire. Who would believe your mother over me? Frank sank back into the chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a hollow ache that felt like his chest had been carved out. The woman he married. The woman he trusted. The woman he brought into his mother's life. She was a monster wearing a beautiful mask, and he had been too blind, too busy, too self-absorbed to see it. Export everything. Frank's voice came out flat, emotionless, the tone he used in hostile takeovers when feelings became liabilities. All 14 days. Separate files. Date and time stamped. I want every second. Marcus worked quickly, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The hard drive word, copying hundreds of hours of footage onto an external device. When it finished, he handed the drive to Frank with both hands, the gesture somehow formal, like passing along evidence in a courtroom. Sir, what are you going to do? Frank closed his hand around the drive, feeling its weight. Not heavy, just a small piece of metal and circuitry. But inside it lived the truth. Undeniable. Irrefutable. The kind of evidence that ended marriages and destroyed reputations and made sure justice found its way through even the most careful lies. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who Ruth Morrison really is. Frank stood, pocketed the drive, picked up his stained suit jacket. Starting with her father, Chief William Chambers, retired judge, decorated military officer, a man who had built his reputation on integrity and moral authority, a man who had welcomed Frank into his family with pride, who called him son, who believed his daughter had married well and would bring honor to the family name. Frank pulled out his phone, stared at the contact labeled Sir, with a small American flag emoji beside it. William insisted Frank call him Sir rather than father, said it maintained appropriate respect while acknowledging their bond. Frank had always appreciated the gesture, the way William had made space for him in a world that usually closed ranks against people from the projects. Now he was about to shatter that relationship completely. His thumb hovered over the video call button. It was late, nearly midnight. William would be asleep, or at least preparing for bed. This call would ruin his night, his week, possibly his entire relationship with his daughter. But Frank had learned something in the security room watching his mother suffer while he chased money across the globe. Some truths couldn't wait for convenient timing. He pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Frank almost hung up, almost decided to wait until morning when he could think more clearly, when the rage burning through his veins might have cooled enough for rational conversation. Then the screen lit up with William Chambers' face. The older man looked half asleep, silver hair mussed, reading glasses perched on his nose, clearly pulled from whatever book he'd been reading before bed. His bedroom was visible behind him, tastefully decorated, American flag folded in a case on the wall, testament to his military service. Frank, son. William's voice carried concern mixed with confusion. It's late. Is everything all right? Did something happen with the Singapore deal? No, sir. The merger is fine. Frank kept his voice steady through force of will alone. I'm calling about something else. Something involving Ruth and my mother. William sat up straighter, his military bearing returning even in pajamas. The concern in his eyes deepened. Did they have another disagreement? I know Ruth can be headstrong, but they're both adjusting to living together. These things take time. Sir, I'm going to send you some video files. Frank glanced at Marcus, who was already working to compress the footage for easy transmission. I need you to watch them. Alone. Before we talk again. William frowned, genuine worry replacing sleepiness. Frank, you're scaring me. What kind of videos? What happened? Just watch them. Please. When you're finished, if you can still look at your daughter the same way, that's your choice. But I want you to know the truth before this reaches the court. Court? William's face went pale. Son, what are you saying? Frank, talk to me. I can't. Not yet. Not until you see what I've seen. Frank's finger hovered over the screen. Marcus gave him a thumbs up, the files ready to send. You taught me about integrity, sir. About honor. About the difference between reputation and character. You said reputation is what others think of us, but character is who we are when no one's watching. He took a breath. These videos show Ruth's character when she thought no one was watching. When you finish viewing them, you'll understand why I'm calling at midnight. Why I can't wait. Why some things are more important than convenience, or reputation, or family loyalty. William opened his mouth to respond, but Frank ended the call. His hands shook slightly as he opened the messaging app, selected all the exported clips, and attached them. The files were large. The upload bar crept across the screen with agonizing slowness. 1%, 5%, 10%. Marcus handed him a bottle of water. Frank drank it without tasting, his eyes fixed on the screen. 20%, 30%. Each percentage point felt like a countdown to detonation. These files would destroy Ruth's relationship with her father. They would humiliate the Chambers family. They would confirm every doubt, every whispered criticism anyone had ever had about his wife. And Frank didn't care. 50%, 60%. The upload continued. Somewhere in this city, in his comfortable home, with his military medals and his law books and his principles, William Chambers would soon receive evidence that his daughter was not the woman he believed her to be, that the values he tried to instill had somehow twisted into something unrecognizable, that the child he loved had grown into someone capable of torturing an elderly woman for pleasure. 80%, 90%. Frank typed a message beneath the attached files, his fingers steady now, resolved. This is the truth about your daughter. Watch it all. Then you'll understand why I had to call. 100%. Upload complete. Frank pressed send. The message showed delivered immediately, then the status changed to read. William was still awake, still holding his phone, probably about to open the first file right now, expecting something minor, some misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an overprotective son, something he could mediate and smooth over with his judge's wisdom and military discipline. Instead, he was about to watch his daughter pour ice water on a sick woman's head and laugh. Frank pocketed his phone and turned to Marcus. Thank you for your help. And thank you for trying to do the right thing, even when it could have cost you your job. Marcus nodded, his young face showing relief and residual fear in equal measure. What happens now, sir? Now I go back upstairs and sit with my mother. Frank moved toward the door. Tomorrow I call my attorney and start divorce proceedings. Ruth won't leave quietly. She'll fight. She'll threaten. She'll try to make this about money and reputation and everything except what it's actually about. He paused in the doorway, looking back at the monitors where cameras still recorded every corner of the mansion. Empty corridors. Dark rooms. His life on display across 12 screens, but with the most important part missing. His mother had never appeared on these cameras before tonight. She had been invisible, forgotten, abused in the shadows while the world watched Frank Morrison collect awards and make deals and pretend he had built something meaningful. But tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Rachel Morrison would never be invisible again. Frank climbed the stairs from the basement, the hard drive heavy in his pocket, evidence that would end his marriage and possibly his reputation. Each step felt lighter than the last. He wasn't climbing toward a mansion anymore. He was climbing toward a reckoning, toward justice, toward the man his mother had raised him to be before success made him forget. Behind him, Marcus sat alone in the security room, surrounded by screens showing an empty house where something precious had been broken. And miles away, William Chambers pressed play on the first video file, his face illuminated by the phone's glow, completely unprepared for what he was about to witness. The night stretched on. Frank returned to his mother's room, found her still sleeping, the nurse dozing in a chair beside the bed. He sent the nurse away, took her place, and resumed his vigil, holding his mother's hand, listening to her breathe, waiting for morning and the war that would follow. His phone buzzed once, then again, then began ringing insistently, William's name flashing on the screen. Frank silenced it. Whatever William had to say could wait. Right now, only one person in the world mattered. Only one person had earned his full attention and protection. Rachel stirred slightly, her hand tightening around his. Frank leaned forward, kissed her forehead, and whispered the promise he should have made years ago. No one will ever hurt you again, Mom. I swear it. Outside, the night deepened over the estate. Security lights kept automatic watch. Cameras recorded empty rooms. And in the basement, hours of footage sat backed up on servers, preserved forever, proof that justice sometimes comes slowly but eventually arrives for those patient enough to wait and brave enough to face the truth when it finally appears. Frank closed his eyes, not sleeping, just resting them while his mind worked through everything that needed to happen next. Lawyers, court filings, press statements, financial separation, all the brutal machinery of divorce waiting to grind through the wreckage of his marriage. But first, sunrise. First, his mother waking up safe in his presence. First, one more moment of peace before the storm. He had built an empire from nothing. Tomorrow he would learn what remained when empires fell apart, and only the truth was left standing. The Chambers family home sat in an exclusive neighborhood where old money whispered behind manicured hedges and judgment lived in the space between front doors and gates. Frank had been here dozens of times for holiday dinners, birthday celebrations, anniversary parties. He had sat in the formal dining room and laughed at William's military stories. He had helped Ruth's mother in the kitchen, earning points for being humble despite his wealth. He had been welcomed, embraced, called family. That version of reality died at 3 in the morning when Ruth's car pulled into the circular driveway. Frank knew because Marcus called him, voice shaking slightly. "Sir, Mrs. Morrison just left the estate. Security footage shows her packing 2 suitcases. She's heading east toward her parents' neighborhood. I thought you should know." Frank had thanked him and returned to his vigil beside his mother, knowing what came next. Ruth would run to her parents seeking sanctuary, support, validation. She would spin the story her way, painting herself as victim, Frank as unreasonable, his mother as manipulative. She would marshal her defenses and prepare for war. But she was already too late. William had watched the videos. Inside the Chambers home, Ruth barely made it through the front door before her mother's scream hit her like a physical blow. "What have you done?" Margaret Chambers stood in the foyer still in her nightgown, a floral robe pulled hastily over it, her face streaked with tears and twisted in an expression Ruth had never seen before. Not disappointment, not anger, something worse. Horror mixed with shame, the look of someone forced to confront a truth they had desperately wanted to deny. Behind Margaret, the living room glowed with soft lamplight. The space looked exactly as Ruth remembered from childhood. Cream-colored walls. Family photos arranged chronologically showing her progression from gap-toothed child to accomplished adult. A baby grand piano in the corner where she had practiced Chopin while dreaming of a life bigger than her parents could imagine. Oriental rugs that cost more than most cars. Everything tasteful, everything carefully curated to project success and sophistication. And there, standing before the fireplace like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence, was her father. William Chambers hadn't changed from his pajamas, but somehow he radiated authority anyway. Perhaps from the military bearing that never left him, the posture of a man accustomed to command. Or perhaps from the iPad he held in one hand, its screen still glowing with paused footage that Ruth recognized immediately. Her own face frozen mid-laugh, while water dripped from an old woman's silver hair. Ruth's designer luggage slipped from her fingers, expensive leather hitting the marble floor with a dull thud. Her carefully prepared explanations evaporated. The victim narrative she had rehearsed during the drive crumbled before she could speak a single word. "Do you see yourself in this video?" William's voice came out gravelly, each word scraping through his throat like broken glass. "Or have you gone blind? Daddy, please." Ruth moved toward him, hands outstretched, already crying. Real tears this time, not the manufactured ones she deployed for maximum effect. These came from genuine fear, the kind that gripped your chest when you realized you had miscalculated catastrophically. "Let me explain." Margaret lunged forward and grabbed Ruth's shoulders, shaking her so hard the gold necklace Ruth wore trembled against her collarbone. Her mother's fingers dug in, bruising, all maternal gentleness burned away by what she had witnessed on screen. "Explain? Explain what?" Margaret's voice broke on the word, tears streaming down her face. "What did I teach you your whole life? How many times did I tell you to respect your elders? Respect your mother-in-law?" Ruth tried to pull away, but her mother's grip tightened. "Mom, you don't understand the pressure I was under. Living with Frank's mother, having to watch my every move, being criticized constantly." "Criticized?" William repeated the word like it tasted poisonous. "You wanted respect, so you forced an old woman to kneel and scrub floors? You wanted respect, so you poured cold water on her head while she gasped for breath? You wanted respect, so you made her eat garbage behind trash bins?" He moved toward her, each step deliberate, military precision in motion even at 3 in the morning wearing striped pajamas. His face, usually warm when looking at his only daughter, had transformed into something cold and unrecognizable. That's how a daughter of the Chambers family earns respect? By torturing someone who can't fight back? By smiling while you film a heart patient on her knees? Ruth's legs buckled. She sank toward the floor, her mother's grip the only thing keeping her partially upright. "I lost my temper. I didn't think it would go that far. I never meant for things to escalate. Didn't think? William's laugh came out harsh and metallic, scraping across the room. He lifted the iPad, pressed play. The footage rolled again, Ruth's face filling the screen as she dumped water on Rachel's head. Look, you're smiling. Do you see that? Every time she suffers, you smile. He thrust the screen toward her, forcing her to watch herself. That is not thinking. That is not temper. That is cruelty. That is you enjoying another person's pain. Margaret released Ruth's shoulders and turned away, unable to watch anymore. She pressed a hand to her forehead, her whole body shaking. Tola, she whispered, using the childhood nickname she hadn't spoken in years. You're destroying yourself. Not because Frank is wealthy. Not because of status or image. But because you forgot who you are. She turned back, tears flowing freely now. You forgot where we came from. You forgot how poor I was once. How I picked leftovers from my employer's table when I worked as a live-in maid. You forgot how I was insulted, degraded, treated like furniture. And through all of it, through every humiliation, I taught you one thing above all else. Her voice dropped to a broken whisper. Never become the person who hurt me. Never look down on someone because they have less. Never forget that dignity isn't something you can buy or inherit. It's something you choose to give others, especially those who can't demand it. Ruth sobbed, mascara running in dark rivers down her carefully made-up face. The perfect exterior she maintained so religiously had cracked completely, revealing the desperate, grasping thing underneath. I was afraid, she choked out. Afraid of losing Frank. Afraid his mother would turn him against me. In Lagos, everyone says a mother-in-law can destroy a wife's marriage. I just wanted control before things controlled me. Control. William tasted the word like poison. He stepped closer until he towered over his daughter, the man who had once hoisted her on his shoulders at family picnics, who had walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, who had believed she would bring honor to everything he tried to teach her. When I approved your marriage to Frank, I held my head high. I believed you would be graceful, grateful, worthy of the life he offered you. He paused, and in that pause Ruth heard her entire childhood, every lesson, every value, every principle her father had tried to instill. And now you've turned the Chamber's name into a joke. No. The word ripped from Ruth's throat. She reached for her father's hands, clutching them desperately. I don't want a divorce, Daddy. I can't face that shame. I'll apologize. I'll kneel before Rachel myself. I'll spend every day making it right. Just help me. Talk to Frank. Make him understand. Margaret moved to her husband's side, gripping his arm. Her face showed the same desperation as her daughter's, mother and child united in crisis. Please, William, call Frank. He used to call you Baba. He respected you. Maybe if you talk to him, explain that Ruth will change, that she'll do better. She looked at their daughter crumpled on the floor, expensive dress rumpled, perfect hair disheveled, the image of success completely demolished. Give her one last chance. Everyone deserves one last chance. William stood silent for a long moment. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, measuring seconds that felt like hours. He looked at his daughter, the child he had loved unconditionally, the girl who had made him proud, who had seemed to embody everything he valued. But the videos played on a loop in his mind. Cruelty. Calculated, deliberate cruelty inflicted on someone vulnerable. And worse, the pleasure in his daughter's face. That smile. That terrible smile that said this wasn't accident or poor judgment. This was who Ruth had become when she thought no one important was watching. Stand up, he said finally, voice cold and flat. You don't deserve to kneel before us. The person you owe your knees to is someone else. He pulled his phone from his robe pocket, scrolled through contacts until he found the name saved as son-in-law, with a small crown emoji beside it. A symbol of pride from the day Frank appeared on Forbes Africa's cover. William had added that emoji himself, told everyone at the country club that his daughter had married brilliance. Now that emoji mocked him. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Ruth held her breath, hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles went white. Everything depended on this call. Everything hinged on whether her father could convince Frank that marriage was worth preserving, that mistakes could be forgiven, that she deserved another chance. The call connected. Frank's voice came through low and rough, stripped of all the warmth William remembered. Yes, sir. Just those 2 words, but they carried weight. Distance. The tone of someone who had already made irrevocable decisions, and wouldn't be swayed by sentiment or appeals to past friendship. William swallowed hard. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, words felt heavy on his tongue. He had commanded soldiers, ruled courtrooms, delivered verdicts that changed lives. But this conversation felt harder than any of them. "Frank," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. "I watched the videos you sent." Silence on the other end. Then a soft, cold acknowledgement. "Yes." William glanced at his daughter shaking on the floor, at his wife gripping his arm with desperate strength. The family he had built, the values he had tried to instill, all of it hanging in the balance. "Ruth is my child. I cannot pretend she is a stranger. I won't deny that what she did is unforgivable. I have scolded her. I shouted at her like I've never shouted at anyone in my life." He paused, drawing a long breath. "Son, I apologize. As her father, as the head of this family, I'm truly sorry for what she did to you and your mother. Maybe I spoiled her. Maybe I failed to teach her where the boundaries are." His voice wavered slightly, the military discipline cracking to reveal the father underneath. "But still, she's just a girl. She has her fears, her insecurities. She was wrong. Very wrong. But my son," the last two words came out broken. He turned away so Ruth wouldn't see his eyes well up, wouldn't witness the proud man reduced to begging. "Please give her a chance. One last chance. I promise you, if she ever repeats such behavior, I will stand with you in court myself. But just this once, let me see the young man who ate in my house, who sat at my table, who called me Baba after your engagement." The room fell completely silent. The grandfather clock stopped its ticking, or perhaps William just couldn't hear it anymore over the sound of his own heartbeat. Ruth stared at the phone like she could force Frank to agree through sheer desperate will. Margaret closed her eyes, lips moving in silent prayer. Across the city, Frank sat beside his sleeping mother, bandaged hands resting on his knees. He had spent the night watching security footage, reviewing 14 days of systematic abuse. He had seen his mother tortured, humiliated, degraded. He had watched his wife smile while inflicting pain on someone who couldn't fight back. And he had made his decision hours ago. This call wouldn't change it. "Sir," Frank said softly, his voice carrying a gentleness that somehow made the rejection more devastating. "I respect you. I know how hard it is for you to apologize. I know Ruth is your only child." He paused, and in that pause William heard the answer before it came. "But there is something you must understand. For my mother, there is no second chance." The words fell like stones. Final. Irrevocable. Not spoken in anger or vengeance. Just simple truth delivered without embellishment. Ruth lunged toward her father, reaching for the phone with frantic desperation. "Daddy, let me talk to him. Please. I can explain. I can make him understand." She tried to grab the phone from William's hand, but Frank was already gone. The line went dead with a soft click, followed by the hollow tone of disconnection. William stared at the phone for a long moment, the crown emoji beside Frank's name glowing mockingly on the screen. "He didn't hang up," Margaret whispered, the full implications sinking in. "He just ended it. No discussion. No negotiation. Just ended it." Ruth collapsed completely, her designer dress pooling around her on the marble floor. Primal sobs tore from her throat, the kind of crying that came from deep loss, from understanding that certain mistakes couldn't be undone, certain bridges couldn't be rebuilt once burned. "No." The word came out as a wail. "No, no, no. This can't be happening. I'm Mrs. Morrison. I'm his wife. He can't just throw me away like garbage." "Like garbage." William repeated her words, and something flickered across his face. "That's exactly how you treated his mother. Like garbage. You made her eat garbage. And now you're surprised when he treats you the same way?" Ruth looked up at her father through tears, shocked by the comparison. "That's not the same thing. That's not fair." "Fair." William's voice rose for the first time, military authority returning. "You want to talk about fair? You had everything. A husband who loved you. A mother-in-law who came into your home without demands or expectations. Wealth beyond imagination. Respect. Status. Everything most people dream about. And you destroyed it because you couldn't control your cruelty." He turned away, unable to look at her anymore. "Go to your old room. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow we'll start dealing with the legal consequences. Because make no mistake, Ruth. This isn't over. This is just beginning." Margaret helped Ruth to her feet, supporting her daughter's weight as they moved toward the stairs. Ruth's expensive heels caught on the carpet, nearly tripping her. She looked back at her father's rigid silhouette against the fireplace, desperate for any sign of softening, any indication that he would keep fighting for her. But William's attention had already shifted to his phone, pulling up the contact information for his attorney. His face had hardened into the expression he wore in courtrooms when rendering verdicts. Judge Chambers, not Daddy. The man who valued justice over comfort, principle over family loyalty. Ruth climbed the stairs supported by her mother, each step feeling like ascending to her execution. Behind them, William's voice drifted up as he woke his lawyer with a call that would begin the process of damage control. Not for his daughter. For the Chambers family name that she had dragged through mud. The bedroom Ruth grew up in looked frozen in time. Trophies from debate team competitions. Photos from high school dances. A vanity mirror where she had practiced the perfect smile that helped her climb social ladders. Childhood dreams preserved in a space that suddenly felt like a tomb. Margaret sat her daughter on the bed, grabbed tissues from the nightstand, tried to clean away the mascara and tears. But new tears kept coming, an endless stream of regret and fear and disbelief. Mom, what do I do? Ruth's voice came out small, childlike, stripped of all adult pretense. How do I fix this? Margaret's hand stilled. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time seeing who Ruth had actually become versus who Margaret had wanted to believe she was. I don't know if you can fix this, baby. Some things break too badly to repair. But I love him. Ruth clutched her mother's hands. I love Frank. I don't want to lose everything. The house, the life, the status. Without him, I'm nothing. Margaret pulled her hands away slowly, something shifting in her expression. If that's what you think love is, Ruth, then you never loved him at all. You loved what he provided. You loved the reflection of yourself in his success. But love doesn't torture someone's mother. Love doesn't smile while causing pain. She stood up, moved toward the door. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we deal with lawyers. Tomorrow we figure out how to handle the press. Tomorrow we start picking up the pieces of what you destroyed. She paused in the doorway, silhouetted by hallway light. And Ruth, you need to understand something. Your father and I will support you because you're our daughter. But we will never defend what you did. We will never pretend it was anything less than cruel and unforgivable. You did this. You own it. And you'll live with the consequences for the rest of your life. The door closed softly, leaving Ruth alone in her childhood room, surrounded by memories of a girl who had dreamed of greatness without understanding what greatness actually required. She curled up on the bed still in her expensive dress, knees pulled to chest, sobbing into a pillow embroidered with her initials. Hours passed. Outside, the city began its slow transition toward dawn. In the Chambers home, no one slept. William sat in his study making calls, consulting attorneys, preparing for the scandal that would inevitably break. Margaret lay awake beside him staring at the ceiling, wondering where they had gone wrong, which moment in Ruth's childhood had planted the seed that grew into this. And Ruth remained in her old bedroom, alternating between desperate texts to Frank that he never answered and spiraling fantasies about how she could reverse this disaster. She would hire the best lawyers. She would threaten to expose Frank's business dealings. She would go to the press first, control the narrative, paint herself as the victim of an impossible situation. Each plan felt weaker than the last, sand castles built against an incoming tide that would wash them all away. Because deep down, beneath the desperation and denial, Ruth understood something she didn't want to admit. She had lost. Not just Frank. Not just the mansion and the lifestyle. She had lost the moral high ground. The videos William showed her made that abundantly clear. No lawyer could spin footage of her pouring water on an old woman's head and laughing. No public relations expert could reframe her smile while Rachel knelt in garbage. The evidence was irrefutable. She had destroyed herself. Around 4 a.m, exhaustion finally pulled Ruth into fitful sleep. She dreamed of the mansion, of walking through empty rooms calling for Frank, finding only echoes. She dreamed of her wedding day, the moment she vowed to care for Frank's mother as her own, the lie tasting like ash even in the dream. She dreamed of Rachel kneeling before her, but this time when Ruth looked down, she saw her own mother's face staring back, disappointed and heartbroken. She woke gasping, disoriented, the early morning light filtering through curtains she hadn't opened in years. For a moment she forgot where she was, reaching for Frank beside her, finding only empty space and rumpled blankets. Then reality crashed back. The confrontation, the videos, the phone call, Frank's final words. For my mother, there is no second chance. Ruth rolled over and saw her phone on the nightstand. 23 unread messages. Her heart leaped. Maybe Frank had reconsidered. Maybe he had texted during the night. But the messages weren't from Frank. They were from friends, acquaintances, people in her social circle who had somehow already heard rumors. The gossip machine worked fast in Lagos, especially among the wealthy elite who thrived on scandal. Girl, is it true Frank kicked you out? Are you okay? I heard you're getting divorced. Call me. We need to talk about damage control. Someone said there's video evidence of something. What's going on? Ruth's hands shook as she scrolled through the messages. The story was already spreading, details distorting as they passed from person to person, but the core truth remained. Her marriage was over. Her reputation was crumbling, and everyone wanted to know the sordid details. She typed out responses, deleted them, tried again. How did you explain the inexplicable? How did you spin systematic abuse into something sympathetic? The videos existed. Eventually they would surface. Eventually everyone would see her face, smiling, while an old woman suffered. Ruth dropped the phone and buried her face in her hands. Outside her childhood bedroom, she could hear her parents moving around downstairs. The coffee maker grinding beans. Her father's voice on the phone with lawyers. The familiar sounds of morning routine continuing while her life fell apart. This was her reality now. Not the mansion in Ikoyi. Not designer clothes and charity galas. Not the envied wife of a billionaire. Just a disgraced daughter in her old bedroom, facing consequences she had earned through choices she couldn't take back. The divorce papers would come soon. Frank Morrison didn't make idle threats. When he decided something, he executed with ruthless efficiency. The same focus that built his empire would now be directed at dismantling their marriage, protecting his mother, and ensuring Ruth faced full accountability for what she had done. And Ruth, lying in her childhood bed surrounded by trophies that suddenly meant nothing, understood with crystalline clarity that she had traded everything valuable for the temporary pleasure of cruelty. She had held power over someone vulnerable and used it to hurt rather than help. She had become exactly the kind of person her mother had warned her against. The sun rose higher, painting her room in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful morning light illuminating ugly truths. Downstairs, William made more calls, each one another nail in the coffin of his daughter's old life. Margaret prepared breakfast no one would eat, finding comfort in routine while their family fractured. And Ruth remained upstairs, paralyzed by regret and fear, realizing too late that some mistakes couldn't be unmade, some wounds couldn't be healed, and some people, once you lost them, were gone forever. Miles away, in a mansion that would soon be sold, Frank sat beside his sleeping mother and watched her breathe. Each steady breath was a victory, a testament that she had survived. That despite everything Ruth had done, despite all the cruelty and degradation, Rachel Morrison was still here, still fighting, still worthy of the protection her son should have provided all along. Frank lifted his mother's hand and kissed it gently, making a silent promise. The war was just beginning. Ruth would fight. Her lawyers would threaten. The press would speculate. Society would judge. But none of it mattered. Frank had made his choice. He had chosen his mother. And no amount of pressure, no appeal to past affection, no threat of scandal would change what happened next. Justice was coming. Slow, methodical, irrevocable. And Ruth Chambers Morrison, lying in her childhood bed realizing what she had lost, would face every consequence she had earned. The Lagos family court building squatted at the edge of Victoria Island, a concrete structure that had witnessed thousands of marriages dissolve into paperwork and bitter memories. Frank had driven past it countless times without thought, the way successful people ignored institutions they believed they would never need. Hospitals for the sick, prisons for criminals, divorce courts for people who made poor choices. Now he understood. Everyone believed tragedy was something that happened to other people, until the day it knocked on your door wearing a familiar face. The first hearing fell on a gray February morning. The sky hung low and heavy. Clouds smudged across the horizon like dirty cotton, neither bright nor dark, just exhausted. Tired. Undecided. Exactly like everyone involved in the proceedings. Frank arrived 30 minutes early with his legal team. 3 attorneys from the most respected firm in Lagos, specialists in high-net-worth divorces who moved with the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to dismantling lives. They had reviewed every frame of the security footage, cataloged every incident, built a case so airtight that opposing counsel would struggle to find purchase. "Marcus, have the files been submitted to the court?" Frank adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror. He wore a simple charcoal suit, no pocket square, no luxury watch, no designer shoes. He wanted to be a man today, not a brand. Just someone seeking justice for his mother. "Everything was filed yesterday, sir." His lead attorney, Chioma Okonkwo, sat in the passenger seat reviewing documents on her tablet. She was 50, sharp as broken glass, with a reputation for winning cases everyone else called unwinnable. Financial disclosures, security footage, medical records showing your mother's deteriorating health during Ruth's tenure in the household. We have witness statements from staff members who were too afraid to speak up while Ruth controlled the household. She glanced at Frank, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes showing something that might have been approval. "Mr. Morrison, I've handled hundreds of divorce cases. I've seen infidelity, financial abuse, addiction, every flavor of marital failure. But what your wife did," she paused, searching for adequate words. "What she did was calculated torture of a vulnerable person. Any judge who sees that footage will rule in your favor. I don't want favorable rulings based on sympathy." Frank's voice came out flat. "I want the truth documented. I want it on record that my mother suffered, that Ruth is responsible, and that this marriage is irrevocably finished. Nothing else matters." The legal team exchanged glances, but said nothing. They had learned quickly that Frank Morrison approached divorce the same way he approached business, with absolute clarity of purpose and zero tolerance for deviation from the plan. They entered the courthouse through a side entrance Chioma had arranged, avoiding the handful of reporters lingering near the main doors. News had leaked, as it always did in Lagos, where gossip traveled faster than traffic. Billionaire Frank Morrison's marriage in trouble. Rumors of abuse. Whispers of scandal. The press smelled blood and circled accordingly. Inside, the courthouse smelled of floor cleaner, paper, and human sweat. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in the same unflattering pallor. The hallways were lined with people waiting for their turn before judges who would decide custody, assets, futures. Some cried. Some argued. Most just looked numb, as if they had already accepted that the legal system was simply a formality confirming what their hearts already knew. The marriage was dead. Now came the autopsy. Frank's team secured a private conference room while they waited for the hearing to begin. Through the window, Frank could see the main courtroom where his case would be heard. Heavy wooden doors. High ceilings. The judge's bench elevated like an altar. Everything designed to convey authority and finality. "Your mother is here." Chioma touched his arm gently. "She's in the family waiting area with the nurse you hired. Do you want to see her before we go in?" Frank nodded and followed Chioma down a corridor to a smaller room where witnesses and family members waited. The space felt cramped despite being functionally sized. The walls painted institutional beige, plastic chairs arranged in rows like a doctor's waiting room. Rachel sat near the window, a thin shawl draped over her shoulders despite the room's warmth. The private nurse Frank had hired sat beside her, holding a bottle of water and speaking in low, comforting tones. His mother looked fragile in the harsh courthouse lighting, smaller than Frank remembered, as if the weeks since Thanksgiving had leached something vital from her bones. But when she saw him, her face transformed. The exhaustion lifted, replaced by a smile that made Frank's chest tighten painfully. "My boy." Her voice came out soft, barely above a whisper. She reached for him and Frank crossed the room quickly, kneeling beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Mom, you don't have to be here." Frank searched her face, looking for signs of distress. "I can handle this. You should be home resting." Rachel shook her head, the gesture gentle but firm. "I need to be here. This is about me, even if I don't understand all the legal words." She touched his cheek with one papery hand. "Besides, I want to see that my son is doing the right thing, that he's not carrying hate in his heart." "I don't hate Ruth." Frank said it and meant it. Hate required energy, sustained emotion, continued engagement. What he felt toward his wife was colder and more final than hate. It was simply the absence of anything. A marriage cremated down to ash, leaving nothing to hold on to. I just need her out of our lives. Our lives. Rachel repeated the words, her eyes glistening. When did you start saying our lives again instead of my life? It's been so long since I felt included. The words cut deeper than any of Ruth's cruelty. Frank realized with sick clarity that his neglect had been its own form of abuse. Not malicious like Ruth's, but damaging nonetheless. He had built an empire and forgotten to build a home. He had provided everything except the one thing that mattered most. His presence. From now on, it's our lives. Frank squeezed her hands gently. I promise, Mom. No more choosing business over you. No more leaving you with people I haven't properly vetted. No more assuming money can replace attention. A bailiff appeared in the doorway. Morrison versus Morrison. Courtroom 3. 10 minutes. The legal team moved into organized action, gathering files, checking watches, making final mental preparations. Chioma touched Frank's shoulder. Time to go. Your mother can watch from the family gallery if she feels strong enough. The nurse will stay with her. Frank stood, adjusted his suit jacket, took a steadying breath. This was it. The first formal step in dissolving a marriage that had been hollow long before he realized it. The machinery of justice grinding slowly into motion, preparing to render its verdict on choices made and consequences earned. They filed into the courtroom in precise order. Frank's legal team on the left side, arranged by hierarchy. Chioma at the table closest to the judge, 2 associates flanking her, paralegals behind ready to supply documents as needed. Military precision applied to legal combat. And then Ruth arrived. She entered through the opposite door with her own legal team, 3 attorneys Frank didn't recognize, probably from one of the firms that specialized in protecting the wealthy from consequences. Ruth wore a conservative navy dress, minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back severely. The calculated image of a woman who had learned humility and regret. But Frank saw beneath it. The performance. The costume. The same mask she had worn throughout their marriage, only adjusted for a different audience. In boardrooms and galas, she projected confidence and sophistication. In this courtroom, she projected vulnerability and contrition. Both versions were lies. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Ruth's face crumbled immediately, tears welling, her hand reaching toward him in a gesture of desperate appeal. Frank's expression remained neutral, carved from stone, offering nothing for her performance to work against. Behind Ruth, filling the gallery on her side, sat William and Margaret Chambers. William wore his retired judge's bearing like armor, face grim, shoulders squared. But his eyes carried the weight of a father watching his daughter destroy herself. Margaret clutched a tissue, makeup already smudged from crying. They had come to support their daughter, but the cost of that support showed in every line of their faces. All rise. The bailiff's voice cut through the tension. The Honorable Justice Adebayo presiding. Everyone stood as Judge Adebayo entered from his chambers. He was in his late 50s, silver threading through his hair, wearing the black robes of his office with the easy authority of someone who had presided over human misery long enough to develop immunity to its emotional weight. He moved with deliberate slowness, knowing that justice rushed was justice denied. He settled behind the bench, opened the case file, scanned the first page with hawkish attention. Then he removed his glasses, cleaned them methodically, and looked up at the assembled parties. This is Morrison versus Morrison, case number 77324. He glanced between Frank and Ruth, his expression giving away nothing. Petition for divorce filed by the plaintiff, Frank Morrison, citing, he paused, reading from the document, irreconcilable differences, and, he paused again, longer this time, abuse of a family member. The courtroom fell silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Before we begin formal proceedings, I want to establish something clearly. Judge Adebayo's voice carried the weight of decades rendering verdicts. This court recognizes that divorce is not a victory for anyone. It represents failure. The failure of a marriage, of communication, of the promises made before God and community. My role is not to assign blame, but to facilitate a just resolution. He looked directly at Ruth, then at Frank. However, he continued, if allegations of abuse are substantiated, this court takes such matters with utmost seriousness. Elder abuse is a crime, not just morally reprehensible, but legally actionable. So we will proceed carefully and thoroughly. Your Honor, Chioma stood, her voice clear and professional. The plaintiff has substantial video evidence documenting systematic abuse of his mother, Rachel Morrison, by the defendant over a period of 14 days. We request permission to present this evidence for the court's consideration. Judge Adebayo nodded. Granted. But first, let's hear opening statements. Mrs. Okonkwo, you may proceed. Chioma moved to the center of the courtroom, commanding space the way great attorneys do, making the room reorganize itself around her presence. Your Honor, this case is straightforward despite its tragic nature. Frank Morrison married Ruth Chambers Morrison believing she would honor the vows she made, including the promise to respect and care for his mother. She pressed a button on her tablet. The courtroom's display screen flickered to life, showing a still image from the wedding. Frank and Ruth at the altar, Ruth's hand on her heart, speaking vows with tears in her eyes. She gestured toward the screen. On their wedding day, Mrs. Morrison vowed publicly to treat her mother-in-law as her own mother, to honor her, to care for her, to welcome her into their home with love. The image changed. Security footage from the backyard. Rachel kneeling between garbage bins, Ruth standing over her with a raised stick. The contrast couldn't have been more devastating. This is what that vow became. Chioma's voice hardened. Systematic abuse. Deliberate cruelty. Torture of a vulnerable 72-year-old woman with documented heart problems. And Mr. Morrison, to his enduring regret, was not present to witness it. He was traveling for business, trusting that his wife would uphold the most basic standards of human decency. She returned to her table, pulled out a thick folder. We have 14 days of security footage, Your Honor. 37 documented incidents. 15 involving physical abuse or deliberately caused distress. We have medical records showing Mrs. Rachel Morrison's declining health during this period. We have witness statements from household staff who were too frightened of losing their jobs to intervene. Chioma placed the folder on the judge's bench. And we have something even more damning. Evidence that Mrs. Ruth Morrison knew she was being recorded. That she looked directly at the cameras and smiled. This was not anger. Not loss of control. This was calculated cruelty inflicted for pleasure. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Adebayo banged his gavel once, restoring silence. Ruth's lead attorney, a man named Olyamide who wore his expensive suit like armor, stood quickly. Your Honor, we object to this characterization. My client admits there was tension in the household. She admits she handled situations poorly. But to call it torture, to suggest she derived pleasure from any conflict with her mother-in-law, that's inflammatory and prejudicial. We'll determine what it is after reviewing the evidence. Judge Adebayo gestured for Olyamide to continue. Your opening statement, Counselor. Olyamide moved forward, his strategy clear from his first words. Your Honor, Ruth Morrison is not a monster. She's a young woman who found herself in an impossible situation, living with a mother-in-law who openly criticized her, who questioned her worth, who made her feel like an outsider in her own home. He gestured toward Ruth, who had her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking. My client made mistakes. She admits that freely. The stress of managing a household, supporting her husband's demanding career, trying to maintain her own identity while living under constant judgment, it created a pressure cooker environment. Frank felt his jaw clench. The victim narrative. The same strategy domestic abusers always employed. Turn the actual victim into the aggressor. Reframe consequences as unfair persecution. Mrs. Morrison deeply regrets how she handled conflicts with her mother-in-law. Olyamide continued, warming to his theme. But regret and a willingness to change should count for something. This court has the power not just to end a marriage, but to potentially restore one. To give two people who once loved each other a chance to heal and grow. He looked directly at Frank. Mr. Morrison, we understand, is hurt. Angry. Disappointed. But divorce is permanent. It destroys not just a marriage but families, futures, the potential for reconciliation and growth. We ask this court to consider counseling, mediation, a structured path forward that doesn't require the nuclear option of complete dissolution. Judge Adebayo wrote something in his notes. Then he looked up, his gaze moving between both legal teams. We'll take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I want to review the security footage in chambers. Just the attorneys and myself. We'll determine what's admissible and how to proceed. He banged the gavel. Court is in recess. The courtroom erupted into motion. Reporters rushed for the doors, already typing on phones, transmitting updates to newsrooms. Ruth's parents surrounded her, Margaret crying openly now, William's face carved from granite. Frank's team huddled around him, Chioma speaking in low, urgent tones about strategy and next steps. But Frank's attention fixed on his mother. Rachel sat in the gallery, hands folded in her lap, watching the chaos with an expression Frank couldn't quite read. Not satisfaction, not vindication, something sadder. The look of someone who had hoped for better from humanity and once again found disappointment. He crossed to her, ignoring his attorney's protests that they needed to prepare. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "Mom, are you okay? This is a lot. We can leave if it's too much." Rachel shook her head. "I need to see this through, baby. I need to watch justice happen. Not because I want revenge." She looked toward Ruth, who was sobbing in her mother's arms. "But because someone needs to witness. Someone needs to say that what happened to me mattered. It mattered." Frank's voice cracked. "You matter. More than anything. More than this entire circus." Rachel smiled, touched his cheek. "Then let's finish it. Let's do this properly, so when it's over, we can both move forward without ghosts." The 15-minute recess stretched to 30, then 45. Behind closed doors, Judge Adebayo reviewed footage with attorneys from both sides, his face growing graver with each clip. When they finally returned to the courtroom, his expression had hardened into something approaching disgust. "The court has reviewed substantial video evidence." His voice carried a weight that made everyone sit straighter. "What I witnessed was not marital conflict. It was not stress-induced poor judgment. It was systematic abuse of a vulnerable person." Ruth's sob echoed through the courtroom. Her attorney placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to project support while his own face had paled considerably. However, Judge Adebayo continued, "This court's primary function today is to determine whether this marriage can be salvaged or must be dissolved. Mr. Morrison, you filed for divorce. Is that still your wish?" Frank stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Unequivocally. "And you, Mrs. Morrison?" The judge's gaze moved to Ruth. "Do you contest this petition?" Ruth stood shakily, supported by her attorney. "Yes, Your Honor. I contest it. I love my husband. I made terrible mistakes, but I believe our marriage is worth fighting for. I'm willing to do anything, counseling, therapy, whatever it takes." Judge Adebayo nodded slowly. "Then we'll proceed to full trial." He consulted his calendar. "This court will reconvene in 2 weeks for testimony and evidence presentation. Both parties will submit financial disclosures. We'll hear from witnesses. And at the end of the process, I will render a verdict based on the totality of evidence." He looked at Ruth with something approaching pity. "Mrs. Morrison, I strongly advise you to consult with your legal team about the criminal implications of what I witnessed on those recordings. Elder abuse carries penalties beyond divorce. The state may choose to pursue charges independently of these proceedings." Ruth collapsed into her chair, the implications sinking in. This wasn't just about losing Frank. This was about potential criminal prosecution, public disgrace, possible jail time. The trial stretched across 2 brutal months. Hearing after hearing, testimony after testimony. The machinery of justice grinding through details with excruciating slowness. Frank attended every session, sitting stone-faced while witnesses described what they had seen. Household staff, freed from Ruth's control, spoke about the atmosphere of fear. The housekeeper who was fired for bringing Rachel soup. The gardener who witnessed the backyard trash bin incident but was too frightened to intervene. The cook who prepared meals and watched Ruth deliberately withhold food from Rachel. Medical experts testified about Rachel's declining health during the period of abuse. Her cardiologist showed charts documenting increased heart stress. A psychologist explained the mental health impacts of prolonged humiliation on elderly patients. And through it all, the security footage played. In closed sessions away from public view, but devastating nonetheless. Each time the videos appeared, Ruth's head dropped lower. Her father covered his face. Her mother wept silently into a handkerchief that grew steadily more shredded from constant twisting. Ruth's defense crumbled piece by piece. They tried arguing provocation, that Rachel had criticized and undermined Ruth first. But no one could produce evidence of that. They tried suggesting the footage was edited or taken out of context. But the timestamps were continuous, unmanipulated, verified by digital forensics experts. They tried painting Ruth as a product of her environment, someone overwhelmed by the pressure of being a billionaire's wife. But Frank's financial records showed Ruth had her own money, her own career before marriage. She had chosen to give up working, chosen to focus on image and social climbing rather than substantive contribution. Finally, desperately, they tried appealing to mercy. Ruth was young, inexperienced. She had made mistakes born of insecurity and fear. Didn't everyone deserve a second chance? But then Shioma played the clip that destroyed any remaining sympathy. Kitchen camera. The morning before Frank returned home. Ruth dumping food in the trash, then turning to look directly at the lens. That smile. Cold, triumphant, utterly without remorse. The smile of someone who knew she was being recorded and simply didn't care because she believed she was untouchable. The courtroom went silent. Even Ruth's own attorney looked shaken. Judge Adebayo watched that clip 3 times. When it finally ended, he removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, the gesture giving him time to control whatever emotion he was feeling. We'll reconvene tomorrow for final statements and ruling. That night, Frank couldn't sleep. He sat in the small house in Surulere where he had moved with his mother, listening to her breathe in the next room. The house felt more like home than the mansion ever had. No marble floors or crystal chandeliers. Just worn furniture and familiar smells and the knowledge that his mother was safe. Around midnight, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Please don't do this. We had something beautiful once. Don't let it end this way. Frank stared at the message, knowing it was Ruth. She had gotten a new phone, was making one last desperate attempt to reach him. He typed several responses, deleted them all. Finally settled on 3 words. You killed it yourself. He blocked the number and returned to his vigil, listening to his mother sleep, counting down the hours until the final hearing. Morning came gray and heavy. Frank dressed carefully, his mother watching from the doorway of his room. She had insisted on coming today, on being present for the final verdict. The nurse would accompany her, but Rachel wanted to see this through to the end. They drove in silence, the city waking around them. Lagos traffic building toward its daily chaos. Street vendors setting up, children heading to school. Life continuing while Frank's marriage breathed its last. The courtroom was packed for the final session. Reporters filled every available seat, some standing in the back. Word had spread about the case. About the security footage that would change how people viewed domestic abuse. About the billionaire choosing his mother over his wife. Frank took his seat. Ruth arrived moments later, looking hollow. She had lost weight during the trial, her expensive clothes hanging differently. Makeup couldn't hide the dark circles. The performance had given way to genuine defeat. Judge Adebayo entered at precisely 9 o'clock. Everyone rose. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge settled into his seat and opened the case file for the last time. This court has reviewed all evidence, heard all testimony, considered all arguments from both sides. He paused, his gaze sweeping the courtroom. This is not simply a case about property division or asset allocation. This case touches on fundamental questions about respect, dignity, and the obligations we owe to vulnerable members of our families. He looked at Ruth. Mrs. Morrison, you had everything. A loving husband, financial security, the opportunity to build a meaningful partnership. And you destroyed it through choices that can only be described as cruel. Ruth's shoulders shook with sobs. However, the judge continued, the court acknowledges that you were young when you married. That you faced pressures not fully understood at the time, that you have expressed genuine remorse, even if that remorse came only after consequences arrived. Hope flickered across Ruth's face. Her attorney sat forward slightly, but Judge Adebayo's expression hardened. Remorse after consequences is not redemption. It's simply recognition that actions have prices. And some actions, some choices, some patterns of cruelty, they sever bonds too deeply to repair. He picked up his pen, signed the document before him with deliberate strokes. After reviewing all evidence, this court grants the petition for divorce filed by Frank Morrison. The marriage between Frank Morrison and Ruth Morrison is hereby dissolved, effective immediately. Ruth's wail echoed through the courtroom. Margaret wrapped her arms around her daughter while William sat rigid, stoic, a father watching his child reap what she had sown. Furthermore, Judge Adebayo continued, raising his voice slightly over the commotion. The court is recommending that the prosecutor's office review this case for potential criminal charges related to elder abuse. Mrs. Ruth Morrison, You should prepare yourself for that possibility. He banged the gavel once. Case closed. And just like that, 5 years of marriage ended, dissolved into paperwork and legal precedent. Ruth led from the courtroom still sobbing, her parents supporting her weight. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions that no one answered. Frank sat quietly while chaos swirled around him. His legal team congratulated each other. Chioma touched his shoulder, said something about a successful outcome. But Frank barely heard. He was watching his mother. Rachel sat in the gallery, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of vindication or triumph. They were tears of sorrow for a situation that never should have happened. For a young woman who had destroyed herself. For a family fractured beyond repair. Frank crossed to her, knelt beside her chair. It's over, Mom. You're safe now. No one will hurt you again. Rachel cupped his face with both hands. I'm not crying for me, baby. I'm crying for her. For Ruth. Because she lost something precious and she'll spend the rest of her life knowing it was her own hands that threw it away. She looked toward the door where Ruth had disappeared. That's the worst punishment of all. Living with yourself when you know you became the villain in your own story. Frank helped his mother stand, the nurse moving to support her other side. They walked slowly from the courtroom, past reporters, through the courthouse corridors, into the gray February morning that felt somehow lighter despite the heavy clouds. Behind them, the legal system would continue grinding. Asset division, financial settlements, all the mundane details of untangling lives that had been woven together. But the important part was finished. Frank was free. His mother was protected. And Ruth, whatever happened to her next, would do it without them. They drove back to Surrey in comfortable silence. Back to the small house with peeling paint and rusty tin roof. Back to the neighborhood where Frank had learned what truly mattered before success taught him to forget. That night, they sat on the porch together. The neighborhood alive with its familiar sounds. Children playing. Music drifting from open windows. The smell of cooking food mixing with exhaust fumes and Lagos's unique urban perfume. Rachel held Frank's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. You did the right thing. I should have done it sooner. Frank's voice carried the weight of regret he would carry forever. I should have been here. Should have seen what was happening. Should have protected you before it got this bad. You're here now. Rachel squeezed his hand. That's what matters. You came back. You chose right when the choice counted most. Somewhere across the city, Ruth Chambers Morrison sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the ruins of everything she had destroyed. Her marriage, her reputation, her father's respect, her mother's trust. All of it traded for the temporary pleasure of cruelty, for the hollow satisfaction of power over someone powerless. She would eventually rebuild some version of a life. Move away perhaps. Start over where no one knew her story. But she would always carry the knowledge of what she had done. The security footage existed forever now. Evidence of who she became when she thought no one important was watching. But Frank, sitting on a plastic chair on a cracked porch in Surrey, his mother's hand warm in his, felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. But peace. The deep, quiet peace of knowing he had finally chosen correctly. Finally prioritized what actually mattered. Finally become the man his mother had raised him to be before wealth and status taught him to forget. The divorce was final. The chapter closed. And ahead lay something new. Something simpler. Something built on the only foundation that had ever mattered. Family. Not the image of it. Not the performance of it. But the real, difficult, beautiful truth of it. Frank looked at his mother's profile silhouetted against the Lagos skyline, her silver hair catching the last light of day, and made a promise he would keep for the rest of his life. Never again would she be invisible. Never again would she be abandoned. Never again would anyone be allowed to hurt her while he had breath in his body and strength in his arms. The sun set slowly over the city, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. And in a small house in Surrey, a son and his mother sat together watching darkness fall, knowing that tomorrow they would wake up in a world where finally, at last, they were both safe. The empire could wait. The business could manage itself. Success could be measured differently now. Not in dollars or deals or magazine covers, but in mornings cooking breakfast together, in afternoons at the clinic, in evenings counting stars while the city hummed its endless song around them. Frank had lost a wife, but he had found something infinitely more valuable. If this story touched your heart, subscribe, like, comment, and share to help others remember that a mother's love is priceless and should never be taken for granted. Your support helps us bring more powerful African tales that teach unforgettable lessons about family, love, and what truly matters in life. Thank you for watching till the end. May you always honor and protect those who sacrificed everything for you.